Hello and welcome to the 25th Vermont Grazing and Livestock Conference. I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. I would like to thank the National Grazing Lands Coalition, Food Animal Concerns Trust, Morrison's Custom Feeds, Rural Vermont, and the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I would also like to thank our partners. I would like to thank the United States Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and the National Resources Conservation Service. I would also like to thank Cedar Tree Foundation and the Forrest C. and Francis H. Latner Foundation. Thank you for joining us for the 25th Grazing and Livestock Conference. The conference is brought to you by the University of Vermont Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture and the Vermont Grass Farmers Association. Enjoy the content. Thank you all and welcome to the What Does It Take to Build a Grass Finishing Program session today with Mike Baker. I am just going to remind you of a few things that I said at the end of the video. And hi, my name is Megan Sheridan. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Grass Farmers Association. So just again, want to bring your attention to the Whova navigation there with the Q&A, the polls, the chat, and the community board. And so when you're wanting to ask Mike a question, please put it in the Q&A in Whova, and we will be able to look through those. And Nico Horster and I will be that voice to Mike at the end of his presentation. The polls area is where you give some feedback to Mike about his presentation. So please visit that before you leave. And then in the chat feature is really for everyone to share their wisdom. If you don't have questions, but you want to share your wisdom, or like the closed captioning link is in there, and other links that maybe Mike may mention or come up. And the chat feature, both the Q&A and chat, actually all four of them, will stay up throughout the whole conference. So if we don't get to a question, we will work hard to get that answer and post it there. So, and once we close the session down, you can still remain in that chat section with people in chat. So I think that's all of my bookkeeping that I have to do. I'm going to turn this over to Nico Horster and to Mike. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Megan, for that intro. I am honored and very pleased to welcome today here for our VGFA conference, Michael Baker, who's from the Extension Service at Cornell and a specialist on beef, all matters beef and finishing beef. And I hope at least some of you got the chance to view the short clip that we had uploaded about what a finished beef looked like, and Michael will plunge right into telling us how we get there. Welcome, Michael. You have to turn on your microphone, Michael. There you go.
There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Many of these that I've been, I should remember that. But thank you, Nico and Megan, for inviting me to be part of this. As I've always said in Extension, my 35 years, the best part of it is I always get to learn something different. So this topic just brought me to a point where I needed to categorize and think of things that kind of as a whole farm issue. So my goal today is to present the four enterprises, cow-calf all the way to finishing on grass, and break them down into various segments. So by the end of this, you can make a determination, or at least have more information on which system best suits your needs, your interests, your resources, and what you like to do, your quality of life, as I call it. So we're going to talk with, or start with, okay, my slides aren't advancing, Megan. Oh, there it goes. I don't know why. Anyhow, so we're going to talk just briefly about nutrition, just because that's the undergirding principle. It's especially in the cow-calf enterprise, it's your highest cost. And so having an understanding, a basic understanding of that is critical for you to make some decisions. And you've seen all this before, the major nutrients. All of them are important, water actually being the most important. Last summer when we had such a drought, there was farms that actually had to haul water or move cattle to another location because water wasn't available. But I'm going to focus mainly on energy and protein. They're the macronutrients and that we need to have a better understanding. So within that, again, energy is measured in different ways, TDN, metabolizable or net energy, and primarily comes from grains. Forage can be a significant source, as well as fermented forages, whether that be corn silage or whether that be hay crop silage or baleage. Protein, and there's a variety of ways of expressing it and analyzing your diet, but crude protein, soluble protein, bypass protein, escape protein, you've probably heard all those variations, but we're going to focus on crude protein to keep this simple. Major sources of protein, that is the highest level of crude protein per pound of ingredient. Soybean meal, distillers has become popular lately with the advent of the ethanol industry. Wheat, oats, wheat midds, all good sources of protein. Legumes, whether they be soybeans, some farms will eat those, but for the purposes of this discussion, we're thinking about alfalfa, clovers, those kinds of legumes, which again can be as packaged dry or ensiled, either in baleage or silo. Pasture is a major source of protein for our ruminant animals because that it's a high source of protein and they spend a lot of time on pasture, which keeps our costs low. Now, the one challenge of cows, and this is related strictly to the cow-calf enterprises, which is greater complexity than worrying about growing animals, is you have to really understand all of these factors to make sure you're designing a ration that meets their needs and not over meeting their needs, because that costs you more. So you need to know the weight of the cow. You need to know where she is since calving. What's the weaning weight of the calf, which will help you determine the milk production of that cow. Stage of production, is she in late gestation, early lactation, and then of course the TDN and protein required to meet all those meet those needs. So a lot of things you have to keep in mind when you're looking at rations for the cow-calf enterprise. This graphic shows the increase requirement for a May calving cow herd throughout the season. So we see in the mid-gestation or winter feeding period time, the TDN requirements per day are pretty low. In fact, on a percentage basis, assuming she's consuming what she needs, is only 52% TDN. Relatively low quality hay by standards. And look at her protein, only 8%. So this is a very large advantage to the cow-calf enterprise, is those later cut hays can fit in very well to maintaining a gestating cow. Now, as you move further along, you can see this line goes up, and then once she's just after calving, her TDN requirements go up substantially from 52 to 60, but her protein requirements do not, only 8 to 10. Well, that's in pasture season, so we don't even worry about protein during the pasture season, assuming the pastures are managed correctly and not overgrazed. But again, this is all met by pasture, which is a good thing. Once we wean the calves, that cow's requirements drop back down to that 52%. So unlike the other enterprises we're going to talk about, there is an annual fluctuation in requirements feed that you need to deliver to the cow herd. It's easy. It's relatively easy to do because you don't have to worry about high quality feedstuffs, but you do need to recognize that's what's happening. Also, I'm sure many of you have seen this graph before. It's looking at hay production, but as the hay is cut later in the season, in this case from June to July, the relative dry matter intake goes down. So cows are eating less because the fiber content, lignans and NDF are going up. And so they just can't eat as much. And so this holds out for the pastures as well, even to some extent in the fall, while it's a lot lush and growth and greener, the lignin and the NDF levels have increased. So dry matter intake can be influenced a little bit even in the fall season. Okay, you've seen this graph too before, right? We've got a whole bunch of pasture here in the spring of the year, then it declines throughout the year after that. So how do we make use of this? And this is in part what separates farms apart because they have managed a way to deal with this excess production. You don't want it to go to maturity and lose that. And so examples I know you know of are harvesting this and then bringing the cows back to graze that regrowth when pasture supplies are declining in your permanent pastures. Bringing in stored feed, it's not uncommon, especially last year, again with the drought, that there was some hay being fed in this August, September timeframe. Megan?
Oh, I just wanted to, Nico's got a question that might be.
Yeah, so just to sort of pause this for a second, so we're talking about our sort of general region-wide most popular calving window and production model in terms of when calving time falls into pasture production. Mm-hmm. And there's a question out there that came up earlier on would this be impacted if we fall calve, and is there an advantage to the fall calving in the second fall, so to speak, when we have the high finishing costs to carry almost finished cattle through that second winter, and also struggling with, in terms of, so I know you're focusing on, and maybe that's where you're going to get to anyways, but we're focusing on the cow-calf operation here. A lot of people in our region have not separated their businesses, and that's sort of the next thing is like into the different stages, right? So often we are small producers, we have cow-calf, and then we sort of carry them through that second winter. So if you wanted to comment on that now or later, that's fine. I just wanted to sort of bring that in there as.
Well, I'm going to finish the presentation with a study we just completed with Tufts University, Cornell, and another group in Manhattan, where we looked at, or my part of the project was to look at requirements for a spring and fall calving herd. We're not going to talk about profitability because that just adds to what we're talking about, but we'll at least look at what's needed and what the advantages of spring and fall calving are. The other thing, I realized that a number of farms model is to have a cow-calf, and then they take those calves all the way to finish. And what I'm going to suggest is that we look at each of those enterprises, and it may be, if you're really good at managing pasture, given all the costs of keeping a cow herd, maybe your best model is to just finish calves. And so I will get into that as we summarize it. And I guess I want to challenge people to look at the different enterprises and see where they best fit. But yes, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so in summary for the cow herd, over and under feeding is expensive. Overfeeding is obvious. But underfeeding is expensive also because if the cow does not get the nutrients she needs, especially around calving, she's going to have a greater incidence of dystocia. Her colostrum quality won't be as good, and then rebreeding could be delayed. So underfeeding, you know, see this every once in a while, going to a farm thinking they can feed, you know, hay bark and straw and do well. Well, we've got to meet her requirements, even though they're relatively low. As I mentioned earlier, the annual variation is in the cow herd in terms of nutrition, so you need to understand that. It has a relatively large land requirement. A cow with an average of a 500-pound calf over the grazing season is about 1.5 animal units. So she's going to require, depending on the quality of your land, 3 acres of land. If you make your own hay, then you need another 2 acres. So the land requirements of the enterprises is the highest. Now, if you're buying in all your feed, then that changes that equation. Labor costs are also high. This is a year-round occupation. There's labor involved with feeding. There's labor involved with making feed if you do that. There's labor involved with watching calving to make sure that that goes through. There's labor involved with weaning calves. So there's a lot of things that go on throughout the year that increases your labor requirement at 10 to 12 hours per cow. So we'll talk about that. Large capital investment. Now, if you're making your own feed, that hay equipment is pretty expensive, especially on most of our herds are only 25 cows. The idea of investing in balers and rakes and mowers, if you really put the pencil to it, it doesn't work. Now, if you're purchasing your feed in, then your capital investment obviously would be lower. This year is a tough year to be buying feed because it's pretty expensive. So you have a high fixed cost. In other words, you have to meet those capital expenses with market price variation. And the prices vary in the cow-calf industry about every 10 years. When cow supplies are up, got a lot of calves, the price goes down. We're in a period now where we're dipping in numbers, so we expect prices in the next 4 or 5 years to increase. And so you'll see changes in profitability also relative to that cycle. You can use land not suited to crop production, and that's an advantage. So that land should be cheaper to purchase or to lease. Another advantage is health risk is low. By and large, other than dystocia, maybe some pink eye, maybe some foot rot, maybe some respiratory issues when you wean your calves. But by and large, don't have to worry about health to the same degree as we do the other enterprises. And you have greater market flexibility. So you've got a weaned calf, and he can go 3 different directions. He can go to a backgrounding operation, which we'll talk about. From there, he can go to a stocker operation, and then finally he can go to a finishing operation. So you've got 3 ways to send that calf, and depending on prices and what's happening and your ability to do some projection, that is definitely a benefit. Okay, backgrounding. So we've got a weaned calf, and call it our teenager phase. It's getting these calves used to being independent, used to eating stored feed, because this is going over the winter period, that they can be wintered in an outdoor location, such as these calves, or indoors, as you see here. There is some nutrient consequences of being outside, because these young calves really need to have some protection, unlike the cow herd. And so your energy costs are going to go up when you background them over the summer. Over the winter. So as I said, this teenager phase, these calves are weighing 400 to 800 pounds. It's a moderate growth rate, only 2 pounds a day. And that's not because you can't do more than 2 pounds, but it's because the marketing side of things. Buyers are not interested in very fleshy calves. And so if you're putting close to 3 pounds on a day, but if you're maintaining them in-house, that's okay, that's for you. But we also know that calves that are gaining that 3 pounds a day because you have very good quality forage, once they go to pasture, they're going to back off. So in terms of total gain, you're not going to do as well. So that's why it's generally recommended to keep that gain targeted at about 2 pounds a day over the winter period. They're forage-based rations. As I'll show you in a minute, there's several different scenarios where it's been demonstrated that we can maintain that 1.5 to 2 pounds a day strictly on forage. Commingling. So if it's just your farm and your calves, the health risk is going to be relatively low, especially if you've got a appropriate vaccination program in place. But if you're purchasing calves because you're a strict backgrounder and don't have cows, or you want to add to the calves you have so you have more to graze in the summer, that commingling, it's like kindergarten, right? The kids go off to school and they come back with all kinds of sniffles. The cattle are the same thing. So receiving programs take a little more skill and are much more critical than other operations. So just want to step back for a minute and just show you basic math. And those of you that finish cattle know this as good as I do. But if we have a birth weight, a calf weighing 85 pounds, it's born on May the 1st, weans off at 500 pounds, which means throughout the time the calf was on the cow, it was gaining 2.5 pounds a day. Harvest weight, 1,100 pounds. To finish on grass, at a minimum, the calves have to gain 1.5 pounds. And then on finishing, they need to be at 2 pounds a day or better to prevent them from getting into that second winter feeding. So that's where some of these numbers come from. If you don't have such a good weaning weight as what we had here at 500 pounds, and so the calf on the cow is only gaining 2 pounds a day, then that winter gain, that backgrounding gain, has to be higher. So it's just a matter of doing some math to figure out what rates of gain you need to meet that market endpoint. All right, the good news about background is we don't need to worry about a bunch of stuff. We want to know the beginning and end weight. We don't need to know about stage of production, grow or finish. We need to know that because that determines the feed we put in front of them, and then the energy and protein required. But we don't need to worry about anything related to calving. So unlike the cows, which the majority of the cow herd is mature, so they're no longer growing, their requirements remain steady. The only requirement that increases, as I mentioned, is when she's lactating. But if we take this steer to gain 1.5 pounds a day, and this blue line represents the energy required, you see that goes up from 300 pounds to 1,100 pounds. And the reason for that is for every pound of gain, there's more fat. So, and fat takes more energy to support that level of gain. So we have to increase that TDN, or metabolizable energy, both from the standpoint, or at least from the standpoint of quality, that is percent in the diet, and or intake. So they've got to be able to do that if you want to get them to a higher weight in a reasonable amount of time. Protein, on the other side, is just the opposite. We see out here at 300 pounds, it's, let's see, I got to get rid of these windows. There we go, 14%. But by the time we get out to 1,100, close to finishing, it's dropped to 8%. So that's an advantage because protein's the most expensive part of your feed. And if you're backgrounding. And so that drops that down. So the advantage, or what can you feed these backgrounding calves? As I'll show you in a minute, dry hay can work perfectly well. It's got to be, early June cut hay. It's got to be stored so it doesn't lose its quality. Baleage fits in really well. I'm not a big fan of baleage for the cow herd. One, it's expensive. And dealing with all that plastic and feeding it can be a real challenge. It's more of an agronomic concern, that is getting hay up at the quality that you would like. But again, as I showed you earlier, if you can get dry hay up sometime in the month of June, then that's going to be enough quality to support the cow herd. But baleage, on the other hand, or silage, hay crop silage, fits in a backgrounding operation very well. You also see more and more crop farmers using cover crops. So there's an opportunity to work collaboratively with them to graze those cover crops. This is a field of oats. You see on this side over here, it hadn't been grazed yet. And, these are weaned calves, and the only fencing, it's a double polywire on the perimeter, but you can see as we rotate, it's a single wire. And once they've gotten used to that electric and it stays hot, managing these animals is not difficult. But these animals graze through December and gain 1.5 pounds a day at virtually no cost. So when available and when possible, that is certainly an opportunity to keep your feed costs low. So we did a study at Cornell a number of years ago looking at what kind of backgrounding weight we could get. So we had 4 treatments. The first was hay crop silage and grain, corn. The second was hay crop silage. And at that time, finishing regimens for markets allowed you to use citrus pulp, which was really great because it had a higher source of energy. That, as far as I know, has been dropped. Hay crop silage, then medium quality hay. And you can see the protein levels all meeting the requirements. TDN down here at the medium quality hay and even bordering it at the hay crop silage was going to maybe create a problem. So this is the first 87 days. We had a group of heifers and a group of steers. These are the 4 treatments on the left. They all started at roughly the same weight. If we jump right over here and look at gain, as you might expect, the hay crop silage with corn grain, they gain more. But the other diets, the citrus pulp helped, and so it was significantly different than the 2 all forage diets. So they were close. These are the heifers at 1.3 and 1.4 to what we need for backgrounding. Of note too is the feed efficiency. So because the cattle on the all dry hay diet ate more and didn't gain significantly more, it cost more feed per pound of gain for that group. And the hay crop silage was more efficient than the all dry hay diet. Bumping down here to the steers, a little bit closer to what we're looking for is that $1.5 pound gain. But again, an increase in feed efficiency, pounds of feed per pound of gain was seen in that hay crop silage. Now we used hay crop silage because that's what we had available at the research unit because we got it from the dairy. But baleage certainly can fit in that category very well. Another study we did up in northern New York, and this time was with Holstein steers, and looked at high quality baleage, high quality hay, and medium quality hay. You can see the end weights were about the same, lighter than what the beef calves were. Out weights were about the same, but look at the gains. Again, better than that 1.5 pounds per day that we were targeting. So it is possible to get those rates of gain. And then the final piece of information is for a number of years, we ran a all forage fed bull test. And the very first year we did it, year 1 was an all alfalfa, orchard grass, grass mixed hay. Jumping right down to the average daily gain, those bulls gained at 2 pounds a day all the way through the period, or the feeding day, feeding period. So again, enough information to show that we can get that 2 pounds a day on an all forage diet to keep our cattle in the right trajectory to get them finished before their second summer, or second winter, I'm sorry. So, summary of the backgrounders. The most profitable average daily gain, again, that 1.5 to 2 pounds a day. From a marketing standpoint, keeping those calves at a stage of production or fat content, if you will, that the next stage, which will be on grass, they continue to maintain that gain and don't drop off because they were gaining too much in your backgrounding program. They're margin operators. This and the next two enterprises are margin operators, which means you look at the current prices, and even if you have your own cow-calf operation, you need to transfer these animals to the next enterprise at least the current market price. So if you're weaning calves and they're going to the backgrounding program, what's the current market price for 500-pound calves? Well, if you go to this website, and if you just type in, do an internet search for Cornell beef, this should come up. And there's a market information tab on there. And we collect data at 4 auction markets throughout the state that lists feeder calf prices. So you can get relatively up-to-date pricing on what the calves are worth today in the market. And that's a valuable piece of information. Because we collected via a market news reporter who's paid by Cornell, grant that I received. And so it's a third-party evaluation of what those cattle are and reporting those prices accordingly. Health risk is high. Now, again, if you're weaning your own calves, probably not. But if you're bringing in others to supplement, then you need to be aware of that. The land required needs to be a little higher quality from the standpoint it needs to produce high quality forages. So if you've got a lot of swampy land or droughty land, poorly drained, this may not fit a backgrounding operation very well. It'd fit a grazing operation fine, especially cows, but maybe not so much as for where you need higher quality forages. Large capital investment, again, it depends on the model you use. I'll get to point 8 here in a minute, but it's a great enterprise or has great potential for farmer dairy operators. They know how to produce high quality forage. Generally, if they haven't sold everything, they still have the equipment. They have the storage facilities. They can feed the cattle, get the cattle, feed to the cattle. So for that particular enterprise, the capital investment may not be that high. But if you're making your own feed, again, and having to deliver it, you're going to need a certain amount of equipment too. So it's a bit larger capital investment, lower than the cow herd, but you're moving up a little bit. I'm sorry, you're moving down, but it's still an investment. Market risk is medium. Again, going back to the margin operators, you should be able to, and there's a lot of tools out there to help you do this, you should be able to look at the current market and do some projections, know your cost of gain, and determine whether it's worth doing. And this is where you may do something differently instead of selling calves to the backgrounders or the backgrounders to the next enterprise. Again, you need to look at the market value of those cattle as you transfer them. Labor's less, dropped from 10 to 12 down to 2 to 4. If you've not used this database, it's called FinBin. Just do an internet search for that. It's out of the University of Minnesota. and it's enterprise analyses from across the country. And you can search down through and filter down through just to get, for this case, I got the backgrounders. And I think there was 34, 36 farms of actual analysis. And this is what they reported on a backgrounding operation. Mentioned about the dairy enterprise. You have market flexibility, but less than you did with the cows. So you've lost one, right? So your stockers either go, your backgrounders either go to stockers or they go to a finishing operation. So you've got two opportunities to make some change in market. And it's a great way to add value to the calves. Whether you're keeping them or whether you're selling them outright, more and more buyers want cattle that are 60 days weaned. And so by doing that, you add value to the cattle, especially if you're purchasing cattle. It's a way to take those lower priced calves and get them up to a price that becomes quite lucrative.
Yeah, Mike, before we move into the next chapter, so the backgrounding is sort of a relatively short window opportunity. It also seems like the risk would be higher in winter because of weather, inclement weather to gains. You need more shelter. It might not be so easy to transition. So some thoughts that sort of came up for me in this is there an advantage to backgrounding during a different season? And if we're looking at a May 1st calving date, an 8-month wean date, and then a 60-day backgrounding, do I have these time windows right, or would backgrounding in your model be sooner when you say sort of in winter, backgrounding through the winter season?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of discussion on age of calf at weaning. We did a study again a number of years ago at Cornell looking at that very factor, where we kept a bunch of calves on cows for 9 months, and then we weaned another group at traditional 7 months, and then compared cow condition and weight gain and so on. And as it turned out, by the time the calves were close to finish on grass, there was no difference. So any advantage you gain early on didn't hold all the way through, and you had to provide a higher quality feed because these cows were lactating in some rougher months. And so the idea of getting them weaned at 6 to 7 months is to get the nutrition into the calf, because as you remember, the cow's requirements are pretty low. So why feed the cow high quality feed when really it's the calf that needs? It's a smaller animal with less to feed, and you can target the diet to that calf. But the other thing you mentioned is right on point. These calves need to be inside. I've worked with a number of producers that thought they could provide at least woods or something for these calves to get into. And when they did the math and figured out how much more feed they had to feed them, and even bedding out in those outdoor areas, they found it pretty quick that some type of shelter would pay for itself. So
is that why we see sort of our Canadian neighbors doing the calving window in late December into January, so that they sort of get out of that? I mean, what we're talking about with the 7-month weaning window, we are in November now, right? With the May 1st calving date. And so now we're backgrounding them for 2 months in November, December, January, however that sort of window pans out. But somewhere in that sort of where it's just nasty, rainy, and the energy requirements are super high because of the weather. So indoors, bringing them indoors, there's dairy farmers that's they often have the facilities, but as beef operators we don't necessarily have that. And then the big question is what happens in that January window with a calf that size. It's almost impossible in our area here, sort of more maybe to the more fragmented agricultural lands, the non-commodity markets, to sell, let's say 20, 30 calves in mid-January at 600, 700 pounds. That's a steep challenge.
Well, a couple things there. I'm sure your weather's been like ours in New York. Would you like to be calving right now? You know, it's been rainy and it's been cold and it's been windy. It's a horrible time of the year to calve, let alone having to feed that cow now that she's lactating. Your feed requirements go up. And so, but there's people that do it, and God love them, I guess I'd say, because we have moved our calving season here on the farm to April, May. It's just, and even last year, April, May wasn't great. So yeah, so April, May, indoor facilities, and I said the 60-day weaning period if you're going to sell them. Obviously, a longer backgrounding program is not a bad thing. But understand too that the price of heavyweight calves goes up past the winter time. So you've got a calf that's weaned at 700 or at 500 pounds in November. Traditionally, that's the lowest price of the year for calves. When we look at the heavier calf going in through July, and you look at the price, and that's when those calves are going up in price. So you can take advantage of some of those counter seasonal pricing by doing that.
Yeah, wouldn't that again be an argument to sort of fall calf and say, okay, or late summer calf, you know, the August, September window, which would then get us into backgrounding in April and May, when we can actually take these backgrounded, just freshly weaned cattle and put them out on pasture where we have the high protein feeds in the spring, where they can grow their bone structure, and, you know, the weather is relatively benign in comparison.
Well, let's talk about that. I've got a few more minutes, so I don't want to. But I mean, that's a good question. And there's some advantages to fall calving. You've mentioned that, the higher prices in the spring. If you've got a spring and a fall, it's more efficient use of your bull power if you're using natural service. The biggest disadvantage that I see is the increased cost of feed, because you're feeding a cow during the worst part of the year to be able to make milk. And so your feed costs are much higher than spring calving. And the other thing is, how is your farm set up? There's a lot of farms that are not set up for baby calves throughout the winter. You know, they lay down next to the feeder, they get squashed. There's just not now, if you're calving completely in the barn, then that's a different story. But if you're calving cows outdoors, which is more healthy for them and cheaper, then the calf becomes a real issue. And depending on your feeders, if you're feeding, you know, feed-through feeders, the calves are walking through it. So there's just a lot of management issues that you have to address if you fall calving. And there was a study, and I should have it memorized, but it was in Kentucky, so they're not really the same environment. They did show an advantage to fall calving in terms of profitability, but realize they don't have our weather. They don't have the winters that we do. So yes, there can be in the right situation. I'm not discounting that.
Great, thanks, Michael, for letting me distract you from your process here.
Not a problem. So I think I've covered all of these. In fact, because other than the labor, for stockers drops again from what it was at the backgrounders, adding value to the calves. But let's run into the finish. Okay, so now, and again, if you've stockered the calves, you only have one market option, right? Go to finish. Whether you do it, whether you sell them to somebody. So that's it. So market flexibility has been greatly decreased. And this top picture, I just want to spend 30 seconds. We have millions of acres of this land in New York and the Northeast. Former dairy, has a few meadows still, but a lot of this stuff out here that could be fenced and grazed. So we have a tremendous opportunity to have access to low-cost land, sometimes free land, because, you know, landowners come and think they're going to do a whole bunch of farming and find out it's too hard, and then you come along and say, look, I'll graze it, give you ag exemption, and So it won't have to cost anything. So anyhow, however you want to put that puzzle together. Ken Jaffe, I'm assuming may be on this webinar. He and I worked together on a grazing program, grass finishing program at Cornell. And I just want to show you, that's Jason Roundtree's work. And I know all of you are familiar with his work out of Michigan State, just showing that you can maintain that 2 pounds a day gain on finishing ration. But this is what, with Ken's cattle, wasn't huge numbers, as you can see. But the gains on finishing weren't quite at that 2 pounds a day. They could have been better. We started with heavier cattle, but this pasture was managed to be moved once a week. So I think had we had better intensive grazing and providing better feed in front of the calves the whole time, we would have gotten better performance. But what's important too, then following that, is we follow the carcasses through, and in this designation of marbling, 400 is select. So this 488 would be close to choice. And the reason this is important is because most studies looking at the palatability and acceptance of beef products show that high select and above decrease the number of dissatisfied customers. So in this case, with the 7 steers, there was 4 select, but still the average was that. So we know we had 3 in the choice category. This one, on average, they were all choice, with the exception of 1 select. Moved down, same kind of deal. And with only 2 heifers, you can't make huge conclusions. But those were well into the choice grade. So not anything that you have been finishing grass cattle for any length of time, not a surprise to you. But I think in a small measure, documentation that it certainly is very possible. So looking at the finish, again, we can make use of this land. It may need to be higher quality, or our land cost per head is going to go up because we'll need more land if it's poor quality. We want to target this gain at 2 pounds or better. Again, the margin operators, if they're buying calves, they ought to be able to look out to see what the market and there's many companies, entities, if you will, that are trying to aggregate or put these grass finished cattle together. And so you have a little bit better price projection on the finished end. So margin operator, but maybe calculating that margin would be a little bit easier. Capital investments, as with the stockers, is low, and that's why young people can get in the stalker business so easily. They can lease land, they don't need any equipment, maybe a 4-wheeler if they want one. If they're a believer in clipping the pastures, maybe there, but they certainly don't need all the equipment that's involved in backgrounding and cow-calf. Labor goes up a little bit because you're going to be moving these cattle more often. So that is going to go along with it. Market's less flexible. It's a terminal market. So what it is what it's going to be. So hopefully you purchased them or valued them, transferred them at a market price from any enterprise prior to that. That makes it sense. Okay. So if we put all this together, and then we can argue about this table probably all day long, but if you look at the cow-calf enterprise all along the board, high labor, high capital, high land, high labor, high equipment, feed quality low. That's a big advantage. Skills, you got to have them all the way to calving to weaning, and the market risk is relatively medium. So the question you have to ask yourself is, maybe you already have the land, maybe it's a part-time job, so really, even though the labor's high per cow, it's something you enjoy doing. You do it with your family, so that kind of trumps the other disadvantages. But I think what this tells us is that in our environment, according to our resources that are available, some of these post-weaning enterprises make a little more sense. Now, you got to procure these calves if you're not producing your own, and that throws in, a monkey wrench. But when you look at all these factors here, that was a conclusion I would make, and I'd certainly like to hear your response to that. Okay, whoops, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. Just one quick on profitability. It's a dangerous slide to put up because this is out of Cattle Facts, and this is a survey of the membership. So these are average prices. So I don't want you to draw too much from the actual numbers, but sort of look at the trends. And so the cow-calf is the green. And you can see all along since back in 2004, the cow-calf operations have eked out a profit all the way through. And that's a positive thing. Again, we're using lower quality land, lower quality feed, corn stalks, a whole bunch of stuff we can do to keep the cost of production low. Moving to stockers, there's a little bit more variation, but with the exception of these 2 years, 15 and 16, they have been pretty much on top of the cow-calf operation, bringing in more profit as compared to the cows. Draw from this what you will. Growth. Always get the question, when should I send my steer to slaughter? Well, this answers your question, right? We've got a steer that's a large frame, a steer that's a small frame. They certainly shouldn't go to market at the same slaughter weight. So understanding when an animal's ready for finish. Again, Megan and Nico mentioned this up front. Again, if you go to a internet search for Cornell beef, you'll find this video, and it helps to go through what to look at to determine whether that's animal's ready for finish, regardless of its weight. Finally, the project. I think I'm going to just jump to the summary slide. Basically, what we wanted to do, we asked the question is, what are the barriers to expanding ruminant meat production in the Northeast? And we did it through a whole bunch of methods. We had modelers on the team that looked at where packing houses were. We had a packer house survey to get their input in terms of what they needed. We had some folks that were really good at looking at land quality using various NRCS maps and so on, and then tried to put that all together to see what was stopping, if there was anything stopping the growth of the industry. My part was to model the amount of nutrition, amount of feed required to take a cow-calf unit to finish. And so, start with a 25 cow herd, which is pretty typical, and finishing that calf by 24 months of age at about 1,150 pounds. We'll come back to that if questions arise. But I wanted to show you here what the results were, and this is what I mentioned earlier. So we've got the spring calving herd, we've got the fall calving herd. Not a whole lot of difference in dry matter required for those 25 cows. And we go to spring, and in terms of energy, it goes up for the fall. Because again, these cows are nursing calves in the worst weather of the year. Regardless of whether you got that cow inside, it's cold. And so she needs more energy just to maintain her body functions. So when we put it out here, the feed costs to keep that fall herd are nearly twice than what it is for that spring herd. On the finishing side of things, not too much difference all the way through. So put it all together, your feed costs are higher in a fall calving herd. Now, they may be a more profitable operation because you've got a better market for those fall-born calves. At some other time we could look at that, but this is just what we were able to find at looking at different models based on research trials. So what enterprise is best for you? Look at your resources. What's your land base? What kind of land could you access if you want to do something? Is it best suited for forage production in terms of stored forage, or is it better suited to grazing? What's your capital resources? If it's a form of dairy operation, equipment and machinery might already be in place, and so you don't have to purchase that. What are your skills? What do you like to do? What are you really good at grazing? Are you really good at getting that calf born up and going into an excellent weaning weight through selection in genetics, forage production, variety of practices? And going further into skills, what about health? Maybe putting calves together and keeping them from getting sick, and when they get sick, you know how to treat them. Maybe that's something that really is something you're good at and you enjoy doing that. There are certainly folks in the industry that are in that fashion. Nutrition, are you good at that? Can you shop around for the best deal? And we haven't mainly talked about grass, but there's sorghum, Sudan, and some of these other pasture mixes. Maybe you're good at that, and that's where your skill set lays. And grazing, as I mentioned earlier. Level of risk, what do you want to take? I'm going to take on production risk because I know I can't do anything about it, but I'm a good planner and I can figure it out. On the market side, yeah, the market scares me because it's quite variable and volatile, but I know how to work around that. I've got experience in it. I enjoy doing that, and I'm going to make that work for me. And it may be that all of these enterprises, you've got the resources so that going from cow-calf to finish makes the most sense for you. And then finally, lifestyle. What do you enjoy doing? Everybody's got black cows, but if I don't like looking at black cows, then I probably shouldn't have black cows. And so the reasons may not be totally profit driven, but you got to enjoy what you're doing. Last winter, I hated feeding cows because it was so muddy. So that was a lifestyle that I didn't care for. So with that, I apologize that I've gone past my time, but if there are questions, clarifications, discussion, I've got a few more minutes.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And we do have a few more minutes. And in fact, because we don't have a session coming right up behind you, we actually have some flexibility. So if you want to hang in there a little bit and take some questions, I know Nico's burning to ask you some more questions.
I will say that I've got another appointment shortly after 2. So
okay. All right. So we should keep it short then. We'll keep it tight. But
yeah,
right.
So one of the questions that has been sort of popping up off and on is people are really, I think there's a few people who are interested in us in sort of focusing on the stockers model. It seems to make sense for our climate, our feed sources, high protein, relatively low energy, if we can make it work with the weather and the other sort of resources we have. One of the biggest issues that I've personally experienced, but also other people around here, is they're just shock crazy. Then where can we source calves that actually behave, that are acclimatized to rotational grazing? Maybe this is because we're coming from a more commercial world, and that deals in these sort of stockers, but often they come from larger herds. They go through a feed auction or are in private treaty sourced, and so now you have health issues on top of the behavioral issues, but they're often not from one contiguous herd or haven't grown up together. And so you throw these calves together, you have 60 of them out in your field, and the first thing they do is they are in the neighbor's cornfield. And so if you have some sort of ideas around that, developing markets that relatively small growers in our region here can access profitably, that aren't auction based because of the often miserable quality and health of the animals and sort of associated stress factors of going through an auction. I don't know.
Okay, well, that's another hour's worth of discussion.
Well, we could do this all day, sure.
I know it, and all very really good question. So the Cliff Notes version is you need to have a receiving facility. So the last thing you want to do, whether it be backgrounders or stalkers, is to put them in a 3-strand hot wire fence. They're just going to bust through it, as you mentioned. So you need to have a physical barrier that keeps them from being able to do that. Then you need a training wire within that facility so that they get shocked many times. And then you just start easy from there. Maybe the first paddock is going to have 3 strands of tape on the perimeter. And then over time, you just decrease that as they get used to it. I mean, we all know there's some cattle that are just plumb crazy. And your best bet with them is just get rid of them. Take them back to the sale barn and don't deal with the headache. Plus, it makes the other calves crazy. So that really has to happen, regardless of the source. The marketing side was a real hindrance, still is to a certain extent in New York. But 2 years ago, and so this year will be the third one, the Empire Livestock Facility in Bath, New York, with some work on my part, wanted to support a yearling sale. So these guys and gals that have stockers, how do they sell them? They're going to be larger loads by nature. They're not coming out of 25 cattle herds. So it'd be easier to get them in larger load lots. The cattle stayed on the farm. They never left the farm. We had them graded by a USDA grader. They were then lauded into gender, weight, feeder calf grade, and sold that way. The day the cattle were sold, again, they're still at home. They're auctioned off at the sale barn, but the seller has the opportunity to refuse the bid, which is a big advantage of the sale. And then, so the sale, say, was mid-September. Well, it's listed on the sales sheet that these cattle are to be picked up October 1st, whatever it is. The buyer and seller work that out. They weighed on certified scales, go from the farm to certified scales, and then off the buyer takes them from there. So it's about as a low stress environment, but yet still using the auction to determine that day's fair price. And we've had some, it's only 2 years, it could fall apart this year, but we've gotten some nationally similar pricing in the calves. So.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. Thanks for saying that. Here's another question that just sort of sprung up, a follow-up on the last slide that you put up. I think somebody's asking, why are the finishing costs similar in the modeling study for spring and fall calving? Is that because they were eventually grain finished, or were they all grass finished in the end, or?
They're all grass finished. So I'd have to go back and look, but the fall calving might be a little higher because you're going that second winter. You need a higher quality feed because the cattle, not a high quality feed, but more of it because cattle are heavier. But not near as different is the requirements between cows spring and fall. So yeah, in the first winter, the requirements are low because they're on the cow.
Right, exactly. So, but what you looked at in that study was a combination of the maintenance costs for a cow calf herd with fall finishing, and then the finishing program is all combined, basically, because there could
we look spring all the way through and fall all the way through.
Okay, yeah, okay. Just to clarify this for everyone.
Okay. So wait,
yes.
I just want to honor Mike's time. So it's 2:04, Mike, and you said you had a meeting. So
Yeah.
The other thing I want to call people's attention to is in Hoover, there's a Q&A session. You can continue to put your questions in there, and we can reach back out to Mike. And, and if there's anything that people didn't get answered that we need to get answered, we can reach out to him or share the collective wisdom. And also, if you'd like to stay in this session and chat with folks, you can continue to chat and in the Hoover chat area. And then also there's a community board. So if you'd like to, gather together with some of your fellow conference compatriots, you can put a topic in there and put out to gather around a topic. So if you'd like to continue to talk about this, maybe talk about a sale, people could get together. So thank you, Mike. But so honoring your time.
Well, thank you, Megan. And yeah, any of those questions, send them my way. And, you know, if there's a group that just wants to get on a Zoom one night and talk about all these things, that would be a very good learning experience for me. So I would welcome opportunity.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's great to foster these communications and discussions. Is always such a boon for everyone, just to have local perspectives, different experiences come in, and you know, you have your own herd, you have your university herd, and I'm sure you're seeing different outcomes there. You know, just because you're not in the same location, it's not the same people managing it, and it's slightly different land probably, and so. Yeah, and that's always fascinating to me. Those of these little tiny adjustments can have surprising effects.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank
I
you.
have to leave, but
Yeah,
we're there.
totally appreciate
All right.
your time.
Take care.
And everyone else will be back tomorrow. Let's see. So we're done for the night, and we'll be back tomorrow at 10. There are 2 sessions. There's the Electronet fence repair workshop, and then there's a whole farm revenue protection workshop. Yeah, check out the agenda, make your plans for tomorrow, and we will see you back here at 10. Oh, and explore Hoover. Like, you can chat with people. You can actually have video chats with people. Like, you can call them and gather people. You can have virtual meetups. It's kind of wild with you don't have to have a Zoom. You don't have to have a Zoom account. You could just do it through Hoover. So I challenge you all to have some fun within Hoover and find some of your peers and have a drink and talk about all the cool things we talked about today. So thank you very much, Nico, for doing this.
Thanks,
I really appreciate it.
Megan.
And I can't help it. I just can't. All right.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.